everybody. We are live, and today in the third episode of our podcast, we have Sebastien, and I'm gonna let him tell me how to actually pronounce his last name correctly, so I don't make any mistakes.
It's Goasguen. Goasguen.
Goasguen. Okay,
Yeah.
we have Sebastien Goasguen. He's co-founder of Trigger Mesh. He was involved from early days into Docker, then Kubernetes, then serverless, a lot of projects, a lot of open source projects, a lot of them involved with CNCF. He co-authored several books as well with O'Reilly. And next to him, we have as well Alex Giurgiu, me, myself, Catalin Jora, and Rafal Maleni from the Ficors Collective. And I let Sebastian introduce himself a little bit better than I can do it, and then we can jump into discussing serverless.
Yeah. First, I love this European group, right? Alex in Athens, Katalin in Amsterdam. I'm in Geneva. Where are you, Rafa?
In Poland, Warsaw.
Poland. Yeah, there you go, Warsaw. So that's really good. Yeah, my name is Sebastien Goasguen, co-founder of Trigger Mesh, a cloud native platform for event-driven applications. I got involved in Kubernetes very early in the early days, 2014, and I was lucky enough to participate in the growth of the Kubernetes ecosystem. So writing software with some other folks, and also writing a couple books in Docker and Kubernetes. And I'm drinking coffee. Sorry, in a small cup because we are Europeans.
Yes. I'm enjoying a cup of tea. So I'm
Got a big one.
Catalin. Yes, a big one, a big one. I'm Catalin. I'm one of the independent freelancers that are part of this Ficors collective, and I'm more or less practitioner around containers and CNCF projects for a lot of years. And I let Alex introduce himself as well.
Yeah, I'm one of the collective members as well. Similar story to Catalin. Started using Docker from the very beginning, and then just progressed with the whole cloud native ecosystem when it was not really called cloud native. Looking forward to the discussion with Sebastien. Rafa, do you wanna introduce yourself?
Yeah, great. So I'm also a member of the collective, but focus a little bit more on business side, on applicability, on building teams around cloud native. So not actually, doing magic in the black screen of terminal, but rather making this world work together with the other pieces of the reality.
So maybe we can just jump into serverless, and Sebastian, from your point of view, how this ecosystem started, and what are the inception points of serverless architectures and the serverless ecosystem?
I mean, the inception is really AWS, right? It's really Amazon, and when they started with Lambda, at least that's how I look at it. So I don't know the exact date, but 2015 maybe they announced AWS Lambda, something like this. And of course, a lot of developers jumped on it and started building application using AWS Lambda, right? So that was one push with the cloud providers. And then at the same time, we had the Kubernetes ecosystem, which was, really growing, very, very rapidly. There was the push, of course, with containers, right? So we had those two worlds, right? We had people that were saying, hey, let's containerize everything and let's orchestrate containers and so on. And then you had people who were, maybe the true cloud native, right? They were developing in the cloud directly instead of being on-prem, right? And these folks adopted Lambda, right? So the question, to me was, hey, can we take the benefits of AWS Lambda and use them on premise, or potentially with other clouds, right? So from there, I think, other people in the community saw this challenge as well. And they said, hey, you know what? We can do functions on top of Kubernetes, right? And that's where we saw the rise of OpenFaaS, Nucleo, Kubeless, which I wrote. There was OpenWhisk from IBM. There was Riff from Pivotal. So we saw the rise of quite a few function as a service solution, which could run on Kubernetes or were Kubernetes native, right? So we had those two things in parallel.
But come back to the beginnings. I remember that Lambda was one of the options to run something else than run a code on your own virtual machine in AWS. What do you think was the biggest benefit for the teams, for developers, just to go deep and then get their code stripped of everything and just focus on the functions? Because this was pretty revolutionary.
Yeah. So, definitely the idea of serverless is, if you look at the world, there are no servers, right? So really what it means, of course, there are servers, right? But what it means is that the user is not aware, right? Is not aware that there are servers. The user is not provisioning the virtual machines, installing packages in them, keeping them up to date, doing security patches, scaling them. The user doesn't know where they're running, things like this. So there's a lot of magic happening, behind the scene, of course, provided by AWS, right? To handle the patching, the auto scaling, the provisioning, and everything. And the idea is that then it allows the user to really concentrate on the business logic, right? Don't worry about writing cloud init and installing packages and so on. Just write your business logic, just write the small function, and we will take care of everything, right? And that's really why they said serverless, right? You're not gonna have to worry about the servers. The infrastructure is fully hidden from you. And in some ways, that's what we've been trying to do for a long time. It's really manage services. So to me, it's almost the real promise of the cloud, right? When the cloud started, there was a concept of grid computing before, and it was very much, hey, I want to plug in the grid, just like I get electricity. So here, what is it? Well, I'm writing this little bit of function, and I just want to plug it, and then please make it scale, patch it, and give me a URL and handle the authentication for me, right? So it's this concept of utility computing, really, and I think that's it's almost serverless represents really the concept of cloud computing, coming full circle and really delivering on its promise, right?
So just to intervene there a bit, do you think that the serverless delivered on the promise of cloud computing? Is it like the final incarnation?
I think if you ask, I'm seeing a little bit of a, I think in English you say chasm. I think in the developers. I think there are lots of people that have embraced AWS and they are 100% AWS and they do everything with AWS, right? So for them, I think Lambda, that's it. That's really the system that allows them to glue all their services together. And then there is EventBridge. We can talk about events later, I'm sure. So for these people, Lambda is really, really good. For other people that may using other clouds or may still be on-prem, when you look at the reality of functions, I'm not sure that this is the right abstraction for development, right? Because there's still a lot of things that need to happen, configuration, monitoring, lots of things. I think at the beginning of Lambda, some folks started to say, well, it's great, you just have a 50-line function, but then you have 500 lines of config, right? So maybe you shifted the problem a little bit.
Yes, yeah. It sounds like it. It sounds like there's no free lunch, right? Or sometimes you have some trade-offs that are difficult to make.
There's never
Uh,
free lunch.
yeah. Go ahead, Rafa.
Yeah, so basically, I have the impression that back the beginning, it was like VMs. Then you had this serverless, basically, and there was not much in between. And Kubernetes somehow filled the intermediate steps. Is it something like good description also of the reality from the beginning?
The reality from the beginning on what was Kubernetes providing?
Yes, actually, the Kubernetes was kind of filling the between the VM and the total serverless. You get your function and you focus on the logics.
Yeah. So thanks, Adrian, who's watching live. Yeah, schism, I guess. I don't know what's the right pronunciation, but thanks. That's the word. Yeah, I mean, if we go back to VMs, I mean, right, early 2000, 2005, we were all provisioning virtual machines, starting virtual machines on EC2 in Google Cloud or OpenStack, Cloud Stack, and so on. So we had to do a lot of config. The startup time of VMs, of course, was long, depending on the cloud providers, right? Depending how they really handle things. And it was natural because a VM is a full machine. So there is, you're booting the entire kernel. So it takes a little bit of time. As a side note, I remember using Azure Cloud in the first days for early years, and booting a VM was taking like 20 minutes, half an hour. Exascale,
I can relate to that as well.
Yeah, Exascale, which is a very efficient regional cloud, I want to say, in Switzerland. That you boot machines in a sub-minute, I want to say now. But anyway, so we were all used to VM orchestration. It was taking a long time, and I think what the revolution of container was really, one, the App Store or the Docker Hub, right? So people being able to do Docker Pool, Nginx, Docker Pool, MySQL, Docker Pool, etcd, you name it, right? So you had this App Store concept, which was much easier to use than apt-get yum install, right? So developers just loved this. That was one. And then the feeling that the startup time was much faster, right? So it would start like this. And people made the mistake of comparing VM and Docker or container startup time. And of course, it was absolutely not the same thing, because one is just a process, the other one is a full kernel. But anyway, so that meant that suddenly we started shifting from VM to using containers to package applications, right? So while for a long time we were writing cloud init files, building AMIs, and it was taking a long time and it was heavy, suddenly we started building containers. We were so happy because it was so much faster, easy to exchange and things like this, right? So where I think Docker failed, quote, and I say this very nicely, is that it was very much a developer tool, right? But in the data center, you needed an orchestrator. You really needed a real, enterprisey orchestrator, scheduler system, which Docker at the beginning was not. So that's where Kubernetes arrived, and I think it was perfect. And even to this day, I really think that Kubernetes is amazing. If you think about it, it almost killed OpenStack and all those systems, right? And suddenly people started saying, hey, let's containerize and let's use Kubernetes. So and I still think Kubernetes is great, but in parallel, again, there was this move, and people started saying, especially a lot of AWS enthusiasts, right, said, forget about containers. Why are you worried about the infrastructure? Why are you worried about building, an artifact? You should just write code and write your functions. So, there was a little bit of a fight, in the industry, and some people started saying, hey, don't even go to containerization, jump straight from VMs to serverless, right? Which also meant, jump straight to the cloud, to a real cloud provider. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
it's like this brings me to another question. Actually, we know more or less why people were using the serverless, why choosing serverless some time ago. Has it evolved over the time? So why right now people are actually choosing serverless over Kubernetes? If there are any, straight decision-making points.
I don't know if that's right. I don't know if I would say this. I wouldn't say that people are choosing serverless over Kubernetes. First, there's still a ton of people on-prem, right? So they're not choosing serverless per se, right? Or if they are, then they use Knative, or they use Trigger Mesh, things like this, right? So if they're using serverless, what people mean a lot is they're using Amazon, right? If you look at the serverless offering of Google, it's still, primarily right now it has become Cloud Run, right? And then AWS, Microsoft has a lot of offering around logic apps, and they have lots of PaaS and lots of container services and so on. So I don't think we should get
So you
bogged down
could
in
say
the
that
definition. But
serverless is a disruptor for Kubernetes. It's somehow a higher level abstraction than Kubernetes, right?
yeah, but I wouldn't say it's a disruptor. It's a different
Yes.
choice, right?
Yes, exactly. That's what I said as
Yeah.
well. I think it's definitely not. It's slightly a different abstraction level and a different way to consume maybe Kubernetes, right?
Yeah.
I always think as serverless maybe as an analogy to a PaaS, right? It's yet another way to consume code and manage it on top of.
What's fascinating in the evolution, right? If you look at Lambda, it started with just functions, and then I think last year or a year and a half ago they announced containers, Lambda containers. So you can actually upload a container image, and they're going to do the serverless management for it, right? But you're not writing just a pure function and letting your CI/CD pipeline deploy straight up like this. You're actually putting a container in there, and I think it was knowing AWS, I think it was a direct demand from their users that they wanted to use containers, right? But also you had Google who started offering Cloud Run. And Cloud Run, they said, the artifact is not the code and the function. The artifact is really the container. So Cloud Run, it's you have a container, you deploy that container, it's fully serverless, meaning fully managed, and then you pay per invocation.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
I
now
actually, I really welcome that change in Lambda, because I always found it very cumbersome to use their own tooling. Somehow I felt much more comfortable with creating containers as artifacts. And it's nice because it's also universal. It's a much more widely accepted artifact, right? So perhaps of course, there's differences between the different platforms, serverless platforms, but at least most of the developers are more familiar with Docker, right? Did you think it was a welcoming change for Lambda?
With containers.
With containers.
Yeah, I think, and hey, to be honest, I'm the first one to recognize mistakes. When I started Kubeless, so it was late 2016, and definitely what we wanted to do is, it was pretty simple. It was a clone of AWS Lambda on-prem, right? So the artifact we thought was going to be the function, right? A little Python code, little Node.js code, and so on. So if you look at the Kubeless CLI, you can do Kubeless function deploy from file, food.py, right? So that was the UX, very much the function. And I remember having an argument with one developer at the time, and the argument was, container is a much better artifact. And I think that it was true actually, and we've seen Cloud Run and then containers in Lambda go in that direction. And one of the reasons is that to me, I think, is that the Docker and hence container revolution has meant that all the enterprises, or most enterprises these days, they've added building containers, pushing them to their registry as part of their software supply chain, right? Or CI/CD setup. So it's easy for everybody now to generate containers.
So
That's
if
that's
someone right now is considering basically technology stack or the way they want to work with the containers, if you were to advise this person, should he or she go for a serverless or Kubernetes? Is it a technological choice, or is it more like an organizing way of work, or the level of outsourcing you want to accept?
So officially, it's not a technical choice, right? The question is really, what are you trying to do, right? What are you trying to do? What's your business? What's your business problem? What's your challenge, right? Okay, so you have an app, you've containerized it. Now you need to deploy. So what are your constraints? Are you trying? Does it need to be deployed on prem? Do you care about it? Does it matter? Does it not matter? Do you have access to Amazon? Do you have access to Google? Do you have some restrictions? There are lots of questions that need to be answered here, and then if it ends up being, well, I'm allowed to use Google Cloud, right? And I don't want to manage infrastructure. There is no infrastructure team. I'm a small shop. Then I would say, well, deploy to Cloud Run, right? So adopt serverless. Why should you adopt? Why should you take Kubernetes? Why should you bother using Kubernetes and so on when you have a system available to you to just meet your needs, right? I think that's a mistake actually on a lot of people with Kubernetes, is that, folks like me, listen, I love the system, right? From the beginning, I love the system. I love the Kubernetes API. I've been doing it for a long time, but it doesn't mean that everybody should be using Kubernetes, right? And certainly as a developer, I don't think you have any business running Kubernetes on your machine. It's almost nonsense, right? So, Kubernetes is great, and everybody talks about it, it seems, but it doesn't mean that it's the right solution for everybody, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And then even the Kubernetes API, sometimes it can be a bit cumbersome for developers, right? If you interact with it and writing YAMLs, you start simple, but then it can get quite complex when you introduce various services and when you're consuming different things in Kubernetes.
Yeah. You don't remember? There was a blog some time back. It was called, the title was called "That's the Future" or "This is the Future," and it was a blog on it's not Engine Yard, but no, what was it? Circle CI. I think it was on Circle CI. This is the future on Circle CI, and I always, it's the future. Yeah, here you go. I'm going to put it in the chat. Okay, let me put it in the chat. I think everybody should read that blog. First, it's very funny, and then it's so true, right? And it's the story of two friends, and one of them says, "Hey, I have a blog. I'm trying to deploy my blog. What should I do?" Right? And suddenly the other person replies, and he's like, "Oh yeah, you can use containers, and then you need a fleet, and then you need CoreOS, and then And I mean, you should definitely read the blog. It's very funny, and it's so true. Where sometimes you're just trying to do something simple. Maybe serve a web page, right? And are you gonna deploy Kubernetes from scratch on VMs in the cloud and to deploy index.html? No, right? So
Sometimes we tend to over-engineer stuff, right?
Yeah.
For the sake of
Yeah.
having new toys, basically.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But you dropped as well this idea around still a lot of people being on-prem, and yeah, they adopt Kubernetes because they want this kind of portability that everybody is aiming for, just to be safe. So okay, we're gonna drop stuff on top of Kubernetes, and then eventually, if we're gonna move cloud providers, which most of the same company will not do, of course there can be merge and acquisition where you actually end up in very hybrid setups and multi-cloud. But they put Kubernetes as a common ground now, which was before it with VM and VMware, something like that. And then on top of that, they will start consuming also for enterprises. We see now with a lot of projects we're involved with something like Knative or maybe OpenFaaS, a platform for consuming functions. And for me, it was surprising to see the last report I've seen from CNCF, the state of cloud native development, was from last year. It was something around like 10 million developers which are doing containers and around 4 million which are on serverless. And serverless, yeah, it has some traction, and maybe you can give your opinion on what do you think is actually, where is it now? So compared to where it started, is it slowly getting more adoption? Is it kind of like flatten out, or it's growing?
Okay, so there are several things in what you said here that are very interesting. I mean, so first, I still think there are a lot of people on premise. That's one, right? So thinking that everybody is already in the cloud, that's wrong. There are a lot of people that are on-prem. Second, even if they're in the cloud, they may still be running their own infrastructure. So they're just using the cloud to run VMs, and then they deploy whatever platform, Kubernetes or something else, in those VMs, right? And then there is another. It's almost a fallacy, right, to say that everybody is doing containers, everybody is using Kubernetes. I mean, for a fact, we talk to a lot of prospects. They don't have Kubernetes expertise, right? They've been thinking about it, they know about it, but they don't have the expertise, and they don't have the time to set it up, to learn Kubernetes, to and to migrate their software system, their processes to Kubernetes. So I'm back from KubeCon. So I was at KubeCon in Valencia. It's 7,000 people. So it was great to see an event again after COVID, right? But I was talking to someone, and I was telling that person, I was like, this is a bubble. We're totally in a bubble. The 7,000 people that are here represent a bubble, which is Kubernetes, Kubernetes top of the stack. There are lots of developers, lots of companies in the world. They're not adopting Kubernetes, right? It's still. I think we have to be very careful with this. There's still a lot of developers that don't have GitHub accounts. Several years back, I got dinged by someone because I said, if you don't have a GitHub account, you're not a developer, right? And I was almost beaten down, right? Are you crazy? But the fact is, it's true. There's still a lot of developers that don't have GitHub accounts. So anyway, we have to be super careful by saying, oh, everybody's using Kubernetes. No, that's not true, right? So one thing I wanted to say. And then serverless. I don't know how the survey was done that you mentioned. People using containers and going serverless. The one thing I would say is that if you look at the marketing of AWS and other clouds, it's relatively easy to start saying that this service is serverless, right? There's no there is no certification that says this is serverless or this is not serverless. So in fact, every cloud provider, could rebrand their services as serverless, right? So does it mean that you're using Lambda? Does it mean that you're using EventBridge? Does it mean that you're using Aura serverless, right? Does it mean that you're using Fargate, right? It could mean many different things. So to some extent, I think more people are going to start using the cloud. That's definitely true. And to the extent that those services are, more and more managed, definitely serverless is picking up, right? But serverless just as functions, I don't know. We will need to get data from Amazon or Cloud Run.
You mentioned that there's nobody really controls. There's no certification for serverless, so everybody has their own implementation of serverless. And there's a lot of people that do also on-prem serverless. So my question is there any kind of portability between these serverless implementation? Is there anything that you can reuse? For example, as Catalin mentioned earlier, a lot of enterprises, they choose Kubernetes just because they think they will have this portability, or developers will get used to a certain experience, right? They understand a bit the abstractions that Kubernetes offers, like pod, like deployment, etc., etc. Is there anything that even resembles this in the serverless world?
Yeah, good question. So that's exactly what I tried to do with Kubeless at the beginning. The idea was, what is the developer experience for Lambda? And you want to have that same developer experience on-prem. So you look at, it's very much a UX, UX problem. And here, what people were looking for really is a PaaS, platform as a service, right? So you could totally think about function as a service, if you equate that to serverless, right? But function as a service, it's on the spectrum of a platform as a service, right? You got, you can take something like Cloud Foundry, and then you can, Heroku, right? And then, Google App Engine, and then server function as a service to is also some type of a PaaS, right? So a lot of people that were starting to use Kubernetes, at some point, they said, hey, you know what? I would love to have a PaaS running on Kubernetes, right? And that's where they started equating function with a PaaS. All right, does that make sense? So we saw, at Trigger Mesh, we saw a lot of people coming to us saying, oh, I want serverless. And then we started talking to them, and really what they wanted was a better abstraction on top of Kubernetes, right? And that abstraction for them was really to have a PaaS for their developers, right? So they were not looking for the auto scaling per se. They were not looking for the function business logic. They were really looking for an easier abstraction to consume Kubernetes, right, and deploy their apps. All right.
Yeah.
So the answer to that problem in the community space, ultimately, to me, it's been Knative, right, which now is in CNCF. And if you look at Knative, there is a component that's called serving, and the entire focus of Knative serving is to give you this abstraction. So it's an API object, right, that's easy to consume and automatically gives you auto scaling, ingress, network routing, snapshotting, lots of capabilities.
And the artifact is still an image, a container image.
Yeah, it's a container.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
And just to finish answering your question, so I think Knative has given you that abstraction, which meets the needs of customers or of needing a PaaS on Kubernetes, and definitely Cloud Run, right? Cloud Run, the API of Google Cloud Run is Knative, right? So today, if you give me a container and you want to deploy it serverlessly, right? I can write an API object, a manifest, right? And that manifest is going to deploy on any Knative cluster, Trigger Mesh, and Google Cloud Run. So that's an example of portability.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. It means there's a ray of hope that perhaps this will gain even more traction. Maybe more clouds will offer the same API, right? There's especially now I see smaller clouds, European clouds are trying to slowly implement their own serverless offering. So perhaps it's going to gain more adoption, which would be fantastic.
You know, it's been the goal from the beginning, even with of VMs. You know, we all wanted in 2006. We all wanted all the clouds to have an EC2 interface, right? And a lot of startups, you know, worked on having being EC2 compliant and so on. So I wish that AWS Lambda, container Lambda, right? You know, the ability to launch containers on Lambda. I wish that we would be able to do this with a Knative manifest. That way you would have full portability between, you know, AWS, Google Cloud Run, you know, Trigger Mesh, right?
What about the cost of running serverless? I had some discussions that it's not so very intuitive in terms of, you know, comparing to not even EVMs, but like Kubernetes or something like that. Do you think there's some good practices over here, or how this can be, you know, better managed?
First, you know, I always think it's funny because you know, of course, the promise of functions is that you only pay per invocation, right? And then it scales up and it scales down automatically, and you only pay per invocation. So you're supposed to save a lot of money, right?
Yeah, that's marketing, right?
Well, yeah, but I think that's true. So I think that AWS actually does a lot of effort and a lot of work with their users to help them reduce their bill. And I think it's you know, it's magnificent to say, hey, you know, come to us, we're gonna help you reduce your bill with us. Yeah, it's amazing. But there are some things that are funny there, which is that for example, the scaling, you see people at the beginning of functions started saying, oh, look, the cold start, the time it takes to wake up the function is super quick, right? So that was one of the big features of serverless that people were looking for in systems like kubeless or OpenFaaS and so on. The ability to scale down to 0, and then you will have a very quick cold start. There was ton of work and discussions on this. And then, you know, what you started seeing also in the community is that people started saying, well, you know, I want to run long-running functions on Lambda, and I don't want to suffer the cold start. So you started reading about people pre-warming functions so that they wouldn't scale down to 0, right? Which meant that they had cron jobs hitting the functions to make sure it would not scale down, which means that, you know, it's costly, right? So, you know, I think it's an anecdote, but I think it's interesting in the mindset of, you know, you're advocating, you know, a killer feature, and then people go totally around it and shoot themselves in the foot. And then the second thing is that people started building a lot of REST APIs with functions, and that meant API gateway, right? An API gateway was and is very expensive. So even if your functions were very cheap, you know, I don't know the exact number, but let's say 80% of the cost ended up being API gateway, right? So functions are cheap, but the rest of the services are less cheap. So API gateway, expensive, Kinesis, expensive, right?
They add up, when you put them together, when you build your system.
Yeah, you briefly mentioned the development experience that you wanted to emulate with kubeless. from the Lambda world, and what what's the main selling point for developers in terms of how do they deploy their applications, how they actually replicate kind of like local environment. Um, what's the current state now? How are people actually kind of like deploying stuff? How do they test stuff locally and running serverless architectures?
Yeah. So I don't, there was a comment about AWS. So I don't use AWS, right? So Trigger Mesh, we're a solution that deploys in Kubernetes clusters. It can be anywhere, but I don't use Lambda. So we should also get the opinion of a Lambda user. But what I would say is that even at Trigger Mesh, what we've noticed, and that what we have to be extremely careful with as technology lovers and developers is that we're very good with the day one experience, right? Oh, look, deploy a function with Trigger Mesh deploy, from file, python.py, right? Oh, great. It's exciting. It makes for a great demo. You can go a few days with this. But very quickly, if you go to prod and you need to automate this and so on, I mean, you're going to go towards more of a declarative mindset. So that's where, we could go talk GitOps and things like this. But you need to represent your logic, your configs, all of this is going to be in a source of truth in Git. It will get deployed. It will get deployed via CI/CD system. It will get automatically monitored with Prometheus and logs with Fluentd and so on, right? So what I'm trying to say is that we have to be very careful when we say developer experience, that it's not only day zero or day one, but it's also once you get in operation, right? And there definitely you have lots of challenges. There is local testing, which is extremely hard when we talk about cloud. I mean, debugging in the cloud, I think, has been one of the most painful things, in my entire life. Debugging a CI/CD pipeline running somewhere, you don't know, right? So on. So even with serverless and even at Trigger Mesh, we are actually right now we are working very actively on this. How can you test locally an event-driven application that is meant to be deployed in the cloud, right? Or that is multi-cloud. If you have events coming from Salesforce that you need to transform, then send to a Kafka cluster running in Confluent Cloud, and then you need to trigger a function that's on-prem, right? How do you test that, right? How do you debug it and so on? So those are very complex problem, I think, and you need to put a lot of effort into it to provide that great developer
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
operator experience.
Absolutely. I think this is a weak point for modern architectures that have the selling point as high scalability. You can run stuff on Kubernetes. It's always, or not always, but a lot of times it comes at the expense of developer experience, right? Do you remember building a website on a LAMP stack? How straightforward was that? You just run the software locally. I hope we can get to that point again at one point. With a modern stack, a more modern cloud native stack.
Yeah, so I mean, AWS, I mean, again has, I mean, there is a system I think that's called Local Stack or something like this that exposes, some of the AWS API, but of course it has limitations, right? Yeah, no good answer. It's a tough problem that I think is solved by automation, mostly by automation and testing, right?
We're working towards it. Yeah, all of us, I think. I want to ask a slightly more technical question now for people that are interested in Lambda functions and regard. Oh, not sorry, not only Lambda functions but also serverless in general. is it what kind of workloads people can work that they fit better this new paradigm, and what do you do with state management, for example?
So, I mean, okay, how to answer this? I mean, at the beginning of Kubernetes, we all said, hey, you know what? At the beginning, focus on stateless applications, right? Don't worry about state, at least at the beginning or at all, right? And the concepts were, hey, you have an Oracle DB database, big enterprise, keep running that, keep it outside, and access it from your Kubernetes services. But what you run in Kubernetes, will be stateless, right? So it's been one of the mentality. This potentially has changed with better packaging of distributed data stores and distributed key value stores on Kubernetes. But for a long time we said, hey, keep state out of the design and so on. In terms of serverless, I mean, I don't know about Lambda, but Knative. If you go back to Knative, and if you go back to the discussion of what's the artifact, it's a container, right? So to some extent, you could package anything in that container, and if it runs a long time or short time or whatever, it doesn't really matter. You can deploy it with Knative, Knative service. It will end up being a pod, right? And that's it, right? It doesn't. There is nothing special about that workload, per se, right? Um,
So you can basically consume all other services that are running in Kubernetes, for example.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
totally. So that's one. Now the state, when you start talking about more of an event driven application, right? And you start talking about the state of such an application, now it becomes a little bit more challenging, right? And there, we haven't talked much about it because you see, it's fairly the discussion here is fairly typical, and it's not a criticism. It's that people equate serverless with functions, and very often you leave it at this. But again, taking a clue from AWS, the big thing for them has also been Event Bridge, and in Google you see it with Event Arc, right? So all those services, they emit events, they emit notification of a change, right? So what's going on right now as a big trend is that you're starting to see the two worlds being unified. You're starting to see a world of REST APIs, which allow you to perform actions, and unifying with the world of event-driven architectures or applications, where you receive notification of changes, right? So you receive notification in real time, you perform change. So we're seeing API plus EDA kind of merge, right? So AWS, that's what you get. All their services are now emitting events, and you can get all those events from Event Bridge. Google is doing the same thing with Event Arc. So what to me a cloud native application is actually starting to be is very much an event driven application that's consuming cloud events, right? So that's a big discussion, and that's really what we're focusing on at Trigger Mesh. How do you enable people to build event driven application? Okay. Sorry, that's a long that's a long segue, but back to the state. When you're doing an event-driven application, how do you handle state? That's a big question. There are ways to do it if you're using something like Kafka, Trigger Mesh. We have an event store, that you can use, but it's a totally different mindset, right?
If we look at talking now about serverless and talking about building it on top of containers, as it evolved, but there are new emerging technologies like WebAssembly and maybe micro VMs, which are also interesting from point of view of being either very quickly to boot or very close to the edge. So, do you think is there room for in the ecosystem for tooling and platforms on top of WebAssembly, for example, to be very close on the edge or around the micro VMs for simpler stacks, which, as you said, yeah, not everybody requires Kubernetes, right?
Yeah, so back from Valencia and KubeCon, it seems that WebAssembly was a bit of a buzz, and then eBPF, right? So definitely WebAssembly, has lots of interest. I haven't looked at it, much, but definitely when you see Cloudflare open sourcing, I think the open source Cloudflare workers plus another one, right? But you're seeing Cloudflare open source their stuff. You know that there is a lot of talk about edge computing, like a retail scenario that has lots of computing in different stores and so on. And that Rancher had a lot of traction with K3s in edge scenarios, right? So this is just kind of trends, right? So you can imagine, you can definitely imagine some type of um, function workload being deployed at the edge in some type of WebAssembly runtime, right? Uh, so definitely, it's totally possible. For Kubernetes or Knative, those things are totally possible, right? We could totally, run, potentially a Kubernetes node with micro VMs and run the functions in those micro VMs. And I'm sure we're gonna see functions run in WebAssembly. What will be the API and how, I don't know, but yeah, it's totally doable.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, we're trying to wrap up the discussion as well soon. So if there are people with other questions from the chat, you can drop them now. Yeah, what's next after serverless, of course.
What's next after serverless? So, we'll see. To some extent, we keep moving, we keep reinventing the wheel a little bit. At the end of the day, we have applications, right? And you code, you write apps, and you need to deploy them, right? So right now they're containerized, and they run in your data center with Kubernetes, making sure that they keep running. We'll see. There's no silver bullet. So we'll see. We'll see what comes next. Definitely EDA for us. At TriggerMesh, we believe that as you need more real-time applications, you need to be able to handle real-time streams of events. And
Just for anyone that doesn't know the acronym, it's event-driven architectures. That's what EDA stands for.
Yeah. So definitely for us, EDA is the big thing. So
Stepping a little bit. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, please, Rafael. No.
I just want to step out of this technical ground and ask you about your current roles you're combining as an engineer, being a CEO in the TriggerMesh.
Mm-hmm.
How do you combine being this, being an architect, engineer, talking about trends, and actually being a CEO?
So technically, I'm not the CEO. Let's say I'm the CTO. But same thing. So my co-founder Mark Inkle is the CEO in Raleigh, North Carolina. Yeah, I mean, the big change for me now, having a team where we're still relatively small. We're 12, right? But there are lots of things happening when you're building a company. From product development, sales, strategy, whatever. And these days I have between around 25 hours of Zoom every week, and sometimes it's too much, so it doesn't give you time to actually work, right? And so this morning I took an hour and a half to write what I would call the stupid PR, writing a YAML manifest that we needed, and then I got on the hook in our sprint, and the guys were saying, "Hey, your story is not done." And I was like, "Okay, sorry." So no, but it's very challenging. It's very challenging. I think calendar management has been very good to me. So I put everything in the calendar. Even sometimes personal stuff, right? I try to create blocks. I need to go work out to stay sane, right? So I put a block, go work out, right? And so you need to find that balance, but definitely I'm doing way less technical things these days.
Another non-technical
Yeah.
question, Rafa, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
We talked about Kubernetes and how it's pretty popular these days. There's a lot of demand in the job market. What do you think? Is there an equivalent demand for serverless or for developers or DevOps people that understand? Well, DevOps not really, but developers that understand serverless or EDA type architectures?
So I go back to AWS, right? If you look at the size of conferences, so KubeCon EU was 7,000 people. I guess that KubeCon US in Detroit, I think it's in October. I would guess there's going to be 10 to 14,000 people. But when you look at AWS reInvent, I think it's maybe 50,000 people in Vegas. I don't know the exact number, but it's huge, right? So there, what we've seen, it used to be that, to get if you wanted a very stable job, you would get Cisco certified or, whatever. Right now, it feels like if you're an AWS certified person, right, that's it. And that means that, you just know one ecosystem, right? You know one vendor, right? And it seems very very focused on this, right? And but definitely, if you can widen your skill sets, Kubernetes, yeah, one of them, of course, right? EDA, I don't know, but definitely being a solid developer that can switch languages, and then somebody who understands automation, right? If some yeah, automation, that's really computer science, right? Can you automate things? Can you replace a human? So to me, if you have experience with this, that's really a very very good skill.
Yeah, and if you're a developer that can understand a bit of serverless, you can throw a demo or build an MVP much faster, right? Because you don't have to understand how to deploy Kubernetes or anything like that. You can kind of manage your own infrastructure a bit easier than before, perhaps.
Yeah, but again, to your question, know serverless. What does that mean? And I think to me, it's really knowing a cloud or knowing a couple clouds and knowing how to use different APIs, right? And yeah, if you know how to consume APIs, then
That
you're
goes
good.
a long way.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. I think we can wrap it now here. Thanks very much, Sebastien, for joining us. It was good talking to you, and for everybody who listened, yeah, thanks for being online and for putting questions. And hope to see you for the next episode.
Yeah, and good luck with your endeavor with Trigger Mesh. All the best. Cheers.
Thank you, and to anybody, go check out github.com/triggermesh, and we love people to take it for a spin and give us some feedback.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.